Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our community town hall, Making Digital Media Work for Our Teens' Mental Health, Learning to Thrive Both On and Offline. Tonight, we have an incredible lineup of expert speakers who will share their knowledge and insights in the role that digital media plays in our teens' mental health. We would like to give a special thanks to the Mead Family Foundation for making this town hall series possible. My name is Jennifer Grinnell, and I'm the Director of Community Mental Health Education here at EveryMind, and I will be your host this evening. Okay. The first person I would like to introduce this evening is going to be Morgan. She's going to be sharing her personal journey with digital media and mental health. Please give a warm welcome to Morgan, and I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Morgan Noble, and I am currently a marketing major at Howard University. And I think the thing with me in digital media is I will be 20 in July. So I have kind of grown up where digital media has become increasingly more important. It's become a large part of my daily usage, especially now that I'm in college and I'm kind of using it every day for research, papers, anything you can kind of imagine. But it hasn't always been that important. And one of the things that I've learned, especially as a young Black woman, kind of going through the increasing need of digital media, is how it can kind of take a toll on you if you allow it to kind of overtake parts of your life. So I was actually in a Dove commercial in 2022, which kind of focused on the impact of digital media kind of on confidence, your self-worth, anything like that. And one of the things I shared there was that I have been fortunate enough to grow up in a household where my mom is a psychologist. So coping skills, anything like that, I was taught from a really young age. So I have the tools that I need to be able to kind of know when I need a break, what it might be doing to my mental state at that time, or anything like that. And one of the things that I've been super fortunate enough to kind of learn over these past few years and kind of really see is I'm a business major. So we're learning about the impact that digital media has kind of in every aspect of our life, business, kind of everywhere. So I've been able to kind of consume news, and anything like that really teaches about the effects that it can have. So as a young person, I'm just excited to share my thoughts and anything like that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Really appreciate you being here and being able to share your perspective at such a young age and kind of what that has looked like for you. So now I'm going to introduce you to our moderator for the evening. So it is my honor to present our panelist moderator, Tali Horowitz from Common Sense Media. Tali is the East Coast Education Director at Common Sense Media, where she partners with state-level organizations, school districts, and community organizations to help integrate common sense education resources to help students and families nurture healthy digital habits. She provides educational leadership through consultation with school districts, professional development, both in person and virtual, and conference presentations. Tali has been an educator for 20 years. She has worked in a variety of educational settings, including as an elementary school teacher in the New York City Department of Education and the San Francisco Unified School District. In 2013, she received a Fulbright Fellowship to research culturally responsive pedagogy in New Zealand. In her free time, she loves face-to-face interactions with friends and family. Please give Tali a warm welcome. And I'm going to let Tali also ask a few questions to Morgan, and then we'll get started with our panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer and EveryMind, for hosting this. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. This topic resonates deeply for me professionally, given the relationship to digital citizenship. I'm also a parent, an educator, and honestly, just as a human in our world trying to navigate our digital interactions. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we're going to jump into the questions. I'm really delighted our panelists tonight include Dr. Mary Ann McCabe, a clinical psychologist who's also on the board of directors of the American Psychological Association, Morgan Noble, who you just met and who we're going to re-meet again in a moment, from the Coma Project, Diana Graber, the author of Raising Humans in a Digital World and co-founder of CyberWise and CyberCivics, and Dr. Michael Rich from the Digital Wellness Lab and the author of The Mediatrician's Guide, a joyful approach to raising healthy, smart, kind kids in a screen-saturated world. So we have Morgan for a shorter period tonight. So I'm going to actually go back to you, Morgan, and ask you first to share a little bit about your thoughts on what you think adults' kind of big misconceptions are about young people's use of social media and just overall tech habits.
Of course. I think the first thing that comes to mind is this idea that like we don't know how to function without any sort of like piece of technology at all. And I think there are some instances where that's true, but I think it's also based off of environment. So there are a lot of spaces now where we're kind of required to have some form of technology as a way to keep up with everything that's happening. So whether that's using some type of platform to keep up with assignments because that's where they're all being posted, or write a paper or do something else like that. There's this constant need for it, but I don't think that the idea of young people constantly needing like their phone in their hand or something like that is necessarily true. I think a lot of people, especially from what I've heard, I know about myself, like my friends, we all know when to take a break. We all know when to put it down. We know like when we can kind of just leave it and we won't really like rely on it. But there are other people who may have a harder time doing that. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible for us to like put it down, but there are some people that require it a little more. So I think that's one big thing. And then I think there's this also misconception in this idea that it is, while yes, everyone understands that it can be harmful, I think there's a misconception in how harmful it can be. One of the things that I've definitely noticed is it doesn't matter kind of what platform you're using, how you're getting your media or anything like that. There is a way for something to kind of affect you, especially as a younger person, because you're learning a lot at one time. So whether you're in school, whether you're working, there's a constant way for you to kind of feed different types of ideas, kind of anxieties that exist about certain things because you have access to all this information at once. So you have access to news live streams, you have access to articles that are being written, you have access to like op-eds, all these different things that are available 24/7. And I think the idea that maybe kind of reading one or two of those a day or watching one or two of these small videos isn't really gonna kind of harm how you feel or anything like that is a huge misconception because what's an example? So I'm on a team in my school of business that's sponsored by Boeing. And I'm pretty sure like a lot of people have seen what's been going on with Boeing in the news. So there are things with like TikToks and Instagram videos that maybe even just 10 seconds that talk about either a whistleblower or something like that. And that's news, or that's how some people get their news. And I think some people, some adults may think, oh, that's not really something that young people should worry about, or it's not something that people are going to really kind of think about because how does it really affect them? But I don't think some people understand that we fly to get home from school. We fly to go to conferences, things like that. So when we're seeing this, we're equating it to, oh my gosh, this plane isn't working. Like, how am I going to go home? So it just kind of feeds these little anxieties that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, or that they may not think are as pressing as young people are able to articulate all the time.
Yeah, that is super helpful. And I'm going to say we're going to come back to this. Just want to kind of summarize the two main points here that, maybe this idea that there's an over dependence or reliance on technology, and maybe adults also kind of underappreciating the impact of news and the barrage of information that young people are getting is having. So we're going to come back to that. Panelists, I'm going to ask you to think about that too. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer for a moment because the delegate is going to speak. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan. Really appreciate that also. And I did want to let the audience know that the chat feature is open. Please feel free to send any questions that you have to the panelists about anything that we're talking about, and put any questions that you might have. I'd like to take a moment now to introduce Delegate Jared Solomon, with some remarks that he wanted to come especially to this event. Delegate Solomon represents District 18 in Montgomery County since 2019. Serving his community, and as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates, he's made significant strides in a wide range of key issues, from education and healthcare to transportation and public safety. His legislative initiatives have focused on bridging gaps, promoting inclusivity, and improving the overall well-being of his constituents. Delegate Solomon has long been a vocal advocate for mental health awareness and support, particularly among children and adolescents. He has supported legislation aimed at improving access to mental health services, increasing funding for mental health programs in schools, and working to reduce the stigma surrounding mental illness. In the realm of what we're talking about here today, and internet safety, Delegate Solomon has been active in promoting legislation such as the Maryland Kids Code to protect children from online threats such as cyberbullying, harassment, and exploitation. He has supported measures to strengthen internet safety education in schools and to regulate online platforms to ensure they provide a safe environment for young users. We're honored to have Delegate Solomon join us today and to provide some comments. I'll turn it over to you, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the really kind introduction, and thank you to all the panelists. I in particular just really want to thank Tali and the folks at Common Sense Media, who were really amazing partners, as were all the folks at Every Mind in helping us get the Maryland Kids Codes passed, which I'm happy to share was signed by Governor Moore just last week in Annapolis, and fingers crossed, pending what we expect will be litigation from big tech companies. We are hoping that the bill is going to take effect in October 1st. And Jennifer kind of gave you a little bit of an overview, but the Maryland Kids Code is really, frankly, groundbreaking historic legislation here in the United States, and it's modeled off of legislation that has been on the books now for a number of years in the United Kingdom called the Age Appropriate Design Code. And we are now the second state behind California. Although California passed the bill, signed into law, unfortunately it was blocked. It's currently blocked by a federal court. We've made a lot of changes to our legislation. We hope we are, again, fingers crossed, the first state that will not only pass it, but actually will have it upheld in court. And what's so absolutely critical about this bill is, you know, it puts the accountability essentially on big tech companies and any company that has an online presence or online product to make sure that their products are not doing harm to children. And Jennifer mentioned, you know, there's sort of two pieces to the legislation, and one is this sort of bright red line of things that companies are not allowed to do, and that includes they can't use these sort of dark algorithms to manipulate young people on their platform. They can't track their data. They can't allow adults to anonymously contact minors. They can't sell their data. And a whole series of other things. But then even sort of more important, the second part of the bill that will take effect in another year is it requires these entities to do essentially a data protection impact assessment. And that's a really fancy way of saying that when you are designing or launching a product, it requires a pretty binary choice. You have to weigh essentially the harm and protection of that harm that your product could potentially do to children, and you have to weigh that more than the potential profit that you could make for it. So we know, you know, as we look at particularly social media companies, you know, the very choice that they have made to put, you know, profit essentially over the well-being of the users of their platform, and they made very deliberate choices to make their products more addicting. You know, they design their products around the brain science of young people to get them to use their platforms longer so that they could make more money. We don't want that to be the case anymore. And you know, I started my career as a high school teacher. I taught high school social studies. I'm easy to peg in Baltimore City, and I spent a lot of time working with our young people here in Montgomery County. And part of the reason that I was so excited about doing this bill is that it gets to what I think is some of the root causes for a lot of the mental health crises that we see in our young people. And we know that this is only a part of it, right? You know, teaching young people how to use social media appropriately, how to use their devices appropriately, is almost just as critical. You know, there have been a lot of examples around the country where legislatures have just passed sort of an outright ban, that restricts young people from using these platforms, that restricts access to technology. Not only as a former teacher, but as a parent, I can tell you the minute you tell a young person not to do something, they want to do it. And plus, we want people to be able to take advantage of the best parts of technology and the best parts of the internet, but we want them to do it in a safe manner. And we want to put accountability on these companies who really for too long, I think, have said, this isn't our problem. Let the parents figure it out. We have a code of conduct, and it's not our fault if people aren't following it. And we know that's just not true. So, I'm really excited. We worked with an incredible coalition of organizations like EveryMind, of parents, of young people. It was really important to me and my co-sponsors, and I want to recognize Senator Ben Cramer, also from Montgomery County, who was my partner in the Senate on this bill. It was so critical for us to center young people's voices in this conversation, because we know any legislation that's going to affect young people, we want to make sure that they have a seat at the table in helping us craft it. So not only did the governor sign this bill actually passed unanimously out of both the House and the Senate, which I think sends a message that this is an important issue, not just to Democrats, but to Republicans alike, literally to every corner of the state. This is an issue that my colleagues, have heard loud and clear from their constituents on. And so I'm really appreciative again of the help from EveryMind, and just really grateful that you all are having this conversation tonight, because again, the accountability that we put on tech companies is only part of this. And I wish I could stay for longer. Unfortunately, it is my son's birthday tonight, so I'm going to have to jump off. But thank you all for everything that you do, and it's wonderful to partner with EveryMind on so many great initiatives. Take care.
Oh, happy birthday to your son.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so
Night.
much. Really appreciate it. Have a good night. Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, Tali, I'm going to turn it back over to you and all of our panel, so that we can get started with a really great discussion, and continuing all of the stuff we've been talking about.
Right. And that was really helpful hearing the delegates' remarks. And you can see there's a lot of support for it in the chat as well. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back for a moment. And I just want to share that the questions that I'm asking tonight really came from all of you joining. You have an opportunity to ask more questions in the chat, but many of you submitted in advance. So I'd like to actually start with you right now, Michael. And if you can just kind of define for us, how do you define digital media? And, Morgan was starting to touch on some of the anxiety pieces that it can bring up, but can you talk to us about the impact on brain development from digital media use? And as much kind of a developmental piece you can add to that would be helpful.
Certainly. Digital media is actually a broad definition that we use to describe something somewhat narrower, which is interactive media, and mostly online interactive media. There are a lot of media generated digitally that are not this, but what we talk about when we say digital media, we're talking about the digital ecosystem that exists behind every smartphone, every laptop, every tablet out there. And, we are, as we grow up, saying we humans, as we grow up, are shaped by everything we experience. As a pediatrician, I say to a child, every moment is a teachable moment. They're always learning. And in terms of truly brain development issues, what is happening, particularly quickly in the first 3 years of life, but really extending right to the mid to late 20s, is that our brain is connecting neurons. We're born with all the neurons we'll ever get, but we are connecting neurons in a variety of ways, depending on the demands we put on the brain. At the same time, we are, perhaps ironically, pruning away synapses or these connections in order to improve our signal to noise ratio. As many people have observed with newborn babies, everything is a startle reflex. And that quickly becomes more narrowed to being startled by unexpected things, but not by mom's voice or by the door opening, et cetera. And so I think that what we need to be conscious of as we live in and bring kids up in this digitally mediated environment is, first of all, that we can no longer say real life and virtual life, or online and offline life. We can't even measure screen time anymore because of the way we use it. We move in and out of digital environments all the time and seamlessly. And in many ways, kids do that much more easily than their parents do, which is part of what freaks parents out, of course, is they feel that the kids are much more adept in this environment, and at the same time, they're in a dangerous environment. So I think that what we need to think about is not just what young people are being exposed to online, but what they are not doing because they're online. If they are staring at their smartphone instead of taking a walk with the friend that they are texting with. If you ask a lot of young people what they're doing when their thumbs are moving across their smartphone, they'll say, I'm talking to my friends, right? When I grew up, that wasn't what was talking. Talking was talking. That was the original social media, perhaps. And so I think that what we need to be conscious of is that our brains are shaped by everything we experience, and by choosing the richest possible, most complex experiences for our kids, and to give them a diverse menu of those experiences, we will do the best by their brain development.
So given that, and I really appreciate you highlighting kind of the opportunity cost, right, from when you're spending that screen time, but also how it becomes increasingly hard to separate the digital versus non-digital times. Do all forms of digital media impact the brain the same way? Are there things that, parents and caregivers should be kind of recommending or, driving their kids towards?
No, they don't all do it the same way. And I think the more immersive the experience, the more it affects the brain. So when we think about virtual reality and augmented reality, that is more a more immersive experience than, say, watching a screen across the room from you, watching a movie, for example. So I think that is the real variation there. And I think the other piece of it is we're affected not just by the content of what we are exposed to, but the context in which we experience it. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a 14-year-old boy and you're watching a romantic movie with your best bud guy friend, with a girl you're interested in, and with your mom. You're going to experience that movie in 3 entirely different ways, depending on who you're with, and what's going on. And so I think that we have to be conscious of where we are using these screens, when we are using them, and conversely, when we should not be using them and how we should not be using them.
Thanks, Michael. Marianne, I want to kind of dive a little deeper into the topic of mental health and its impact. When Morgan brought up how, adults might not be realizing how young people are taking in, let's say, the barrage of information or breaking news. Can you talk a little bit more about the mental health impacts, and is there anything young people can do to mitigate it? Oh, and you're muted.
So sorry. Sure, be happy to. First of all, I think I want to piggyback a little bit on what Rich was just talking about, which is that this is some of the effects are very specific to adolescent development, and what's happening in the brain in adolescence, and both in terms of kids' interaction with media and what's going on in their lives. It's not the only thing going on. It's an incredibly stressful time with so much change, both in the brain, in the body, in relationships, in the world. And that provides a lot of opportunity, by the way. It's an opportunity for them to have a lot of positive benefits from information and experimentation and growing. I do think that all of us have had an impact from overexposure to information. especially during the last several years that have been just filled with strife. And a lot of us have experienced, anxiety that we might not have before. And young people are, of course, even more vulnerable. I want to speak a little bit specifically, though, to social media, which I think is one of the, digital media areas that really has a specific capacity for both positive and negative effects on young people. Piggybacking again on what Dr. Rich was saying, teens have a specific, their brains are hardwired for wanting attention from peers, for emotional stimulation, for being approved by their peer group instead of just their family. And they also have, I think, as Dr. Rich was also alluding to, their self-control system comes on, very gradually and later. So they're at prime risk for some of the specific features of social media, with likes and likes from peers, from algorithms that drive content to them that can be emotionally stimulating. And I think that's where we see a lot of specific effects for teens. Again, not all negative. I want to highlight in the beginning the positive effects. I really think it's important for us to hold on to the fact that this is not all good and not all bad. Some of the positive effects are that kids can often get a better sense of community from their experience with social media. They can see people like themselves. They can identify with people and feel less lonely, especially if they have some reason for feeling particularly vulnerable. I think it also, as we were talking about earlier, can give them a source of information. Sometimes that's health information. Sometimes it's health and mental health information. And I think it also gives them a chance to practice some social interaction. For some kids who are either anxious or sad or feel particularly vulnerable, it's safer to practice those interactions online than it is in person. But let me mention then some of the downsides or some of the negative effects. And here I want to mention that there's exposures to harmful behaviors, to racism, to cyberbullying, to misinformation, as we were just talking about. There's comparing oneself to others much more readily than you do in just a day-to-day average life. And then most importantly, again, this is something Dr. Rich pointed out, there's things you don't do when you're spending time online. There's loss of sleep, and that's a huge problem for young people and causes mental health effects and effects on brain development. There's less physical activity, and in many cases, there's less in-person interaction. So I think those are my kind of main points of the positive and negative effects that relate to mental health.
Helpful, and we'll come back to some of those. I want to move to Diana for a moment.
Okay.
Ask you to share some strategies parents and caregivers can use with their kids to promote healthy digital habits. So, all the things Marianne highlighted, all the good stuff, how can we get more of that and avoid some of those negatives?
Sure. Well, I want to start out by acknowledging how busy parents are. This is the point where parents go, I have so much to do. I don't put anything else on my plate. And I completely acknowledge that, number one. So what I'm going to offer is really, really easy for parents. I just think to be cognizant of modeling, because kids look to parents to figure out how to be an adult. So this happens from day one. Even tiny kids are looking at their parents and they say, oh, an adult walks around doing this all day. And an adult would look at this rather than the person in front of them. So I think just modeling when you use your phone, appropriate phone use. And the other thing too is like, when you're using your phone, I love this. I have friends that do this when they have even little children. They'll say, oh, I'm using my phone as a tool to look up a recipe that I'm going to cook tonight. You're not just scrolling through TikTok, watching all the latest videos. So, model that really intentional use of technology. So I think those are really, really easy things for parents to do, but I don't want to put anything else on a parent's plate. So What I think really, really works to help kids, I know Tally's going to agree with me on this one, is education in the classroom. I think we can accomplish so much faster by teaching digital literacy to kids in the classroom, because then you can cover all these topics of the downsides that Dr. McCabe just mentioned, you know, the misinformation, the overexposure to, you know, too much screen time, blah, 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 all that stuff. Address it in the classroom, and that accomplishes two things. Kids get smart about what's online and they use technology better. And I'm going to point directly to the APA research on this, because I read that thing past the headline that scared everybody. But they recommend, you know, teaching digital literacy skills. And they say one way to teach these skills may be to lean into teens' inherent skepticism. Now, this is important because teens are skeptical. So if we turn it around and say, hey, you know what TikTok's doing? They're collecting your personal information. You know what your cell phone's doing? It's got this thing called an algorithm, and it's trying to trick you into what you like. Like, all that stuff is powerful education. And I think if we really lean into that, it takes stuff off the parents' plate. We don't have to wait for California, yay California, in your state to pass these laws. And we can get to this generation of kids right now that really need our help. So that's my two things. Easy for parents, but harder for the schools. And I think that if we just keep pushing them to do digital literacy in schools, we'll be doing kids a big favor.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Common Sense, we do have a whole free curriculum on this, and it takes a whole community approach. So I also love how you highlighted the parts with parents and kind of that modeling and talking through. And I guess I'd be curious, you know, you talked about at the earliest ages, Diana, right? Parents can be saying like, hey, I'm looking for a recipe, or I'm checking my work email, or I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I wonder if you've seen, Dr. McCabe, is there an ideal time when parents should be talking about their device use with kids, or is that really from the get-go?
Oh, it's fascinating. First of all, Diana, I could not agree with you more. I'm so thrilled with everything you just said. I dream of a world where eventually kids are just learning digital literacy routinely in school. And I hate to put anything more on a teacher's plate either. But I think it needs to be universal. So I have a couple of thoughts about this, Tali. I think the ideal time for kids to really learn safe habits is before they start, especially with social media, right? Before they have access to it. And so if this were routine education, for example, in our hypothetical world, our ideal world where it would be happening in schools, just like other education, you'd start with something very simple in the earliest grades, and then be very sure that you're covering some of the more important safeguards when kids are probably preteen, right? By the time they're entering puberty, then this adolescent brain development piece is starting to kick in. And we really want some safeguards to be in place before that. So I would say certainly by the age of 10, kids have some literacy around privacy, safety, not comparing themselves to others, that people aren't necessarily who they say they are, and things like that. So certainly by the time kids are maybe and around the time they're entering middle school. But starting earlier would be greater. It just has to be simpler.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Rich, I was coming to you next.
I would love to add to that.
Yes.
And Dr. McCabe, I'll see you and raise you. What I say is that when kids should start learning digital or media literacy is when they start using media, period. That means that when we sit the infant on our lap and read them a board book, we're explaining to them how this medium works. When we sit with them and watch Sesame Street, we are asking them questions like, how do you think that made Elmo feel? Things of that nature, so that it is ingrained in their use and in their consumption from the get-go. Obviously, more complex issues like privacy and personal data need to be brought in later. But if you've laid the foundation here, it actually starts well before school. I would actually see and raise you too, Diana, saying, you know, digital literacy needs to be taught in the schools because it is inherent to everything that is taught in the schools. In other words, I think the reason the schools or some teachers go, oh, I can't do that, is they think of it as a separate issue. It is not a separate issue. Kids get most of their information through media now. And we need to be teaching how they are receiving this information and what they are creating in these media in what is now a two-direction street here. It's not just watching TV anymore. And so I think that if we realize that this is not a separate issue, but is in fact the environment in which these kids are growing up, media are as ubiquitous as the air they breathe. We can work with the industry on improving the quality of the air, but we also can be learning to breathe in ways that are healthy for us and those whom we care about.
Diana, do you want to add anything? If not, I have another question for Dr.
Yeah,
Rich.
okay, I'm going to raise you one.
Okay.
So I always think like digital literacy really starts with the social emotional skills, right? So everybody wants to raise a child who's going to be good and kind. And how do we do that? Well, we really focus on having them have really strong social emotional skills that you develop offline by face-to-face interactions and all that. So if we say start there, and then you've got this kid who's really smart, who's got good social skills, they're going to take those great skills online. So I think that's where we start. And then, as you say, as they're doing media, explain it to them. And as they get older, then teach them the mechanisms that make digital media work and all the other important stuff, privacy, personal information. But it's a spectrum that can start like day one. You know, we see infants looking at iPads all the time. Well, maybe not so much iPad, maybe more face-to-face, maybe more interaction with parents. And that's laying those strong skills that will work across the board in their ubiquitous life, whether they're online or off.
So I want to switch gears a little bit because I think we all agree on the importance of starting early and young and often and how this needs to be embedded in all areas, 100%. What do you do? And I'm thinking, Dr. Rich, you just wrote this book. What do you do with a teen who's really struggling at this point, who maybe self-identifies as being addicted or the parent or caregiver does? How do you kind of help instill those healthier habits at that point?
Well, as I think you know, I direct what I think is still the only, but certainly the first clinical program in the country dedicated to issues around digital media. At the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, we see kids who have gotten in trouble with gaming, more prevalent in boys, social media, more prevalent with girls, pornography, interestingly, pretty evenly balanced between the sexes, and then what we're calling information binging, which is the endless Reddit or Quora or YouTube videos, etc. There is a lot of overspill in every direction among many of those. Here's the interesting thing. Of the hundreds of kids we've seen whose parents brought them in saying, this kid is, staying up all night, he's not getting up for school, or this girl's in so much trouble, she's anxious, she's, freaking out about her body, she has a body image issue. When we actually talk to the kids about their pain points, those behaviors are not actually the problem, but they are their attempts to soothe themselves from the problem. We have yet to find a young person who is having problems with interactive media who did not have underlying attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety or depression preceding, but often amplified and accelerated by their use of the interactive space. So what we actually see is that addiction, which is not a medical term at all, it's really a colloquial or social term, but addiction as we understand it is use of a pleasurable but unnecessary substance or behavior that continues despite negative consequences, often increases. And our therapeutic approach is actually abstinence because it's not necessary for life. we actually see PIMU, problematic interactive media use, as more akin to binge eating disorder, because that is something that is driven by underlying psychological needs, that is actually something that is necessary for life, which interactive media skills are now in order to educate, to work, to entertain, to connect. So the goal in each of those is self-regulation, using food, using interactive media in ways that are purposeful, productive, and only used when that is the tool that is necessary, and put down when it is not the best tool for the job.
Wow. Okay. This was incredibly helpful. I have a lot of follow-up questions. I want to direct these to both you and Dr. McCabe here. So taking a step back for a moment, before we get to these more extreme situations where it sounds like what you're saying is really it's a symptom versus the cause of the issue, what are signs that it is an issue to begin with? When should parents and caregivers be worried about it? And then I'm going to ask, what are the steps to kind of jump in early? So I'm putting this to both you, Dr. Rich, and Dr. McCabe.
Well, I can tell you what walks in our door. I would say that the two leading, complaints are not from the kids themselves, but from their parents. And they are failing in school and sleep. Those are the two sort of presenting issues. When we dig a little deeper, it becomes quite clear that they have withdrawn in many ways. They have stepped away from interactions with family and friends, that they are often angry and aggressive when asked to stop. This is, in many ways, it's a family systems issue. It's not just an individual child, because one of the first things I have to say to these parents is stop policing your child and start supporting her or his success. And both the kid and the parents breathe a sigh of relief, because they've been at odds with each other for so long. But in an effort to answer the question you asked before that I didn't answer because I went off on the tangent about addiction, is what we try to do is find the young person's pain points. And when they are out of this conflictual situation, they will acknowledge they wish they did better in school. They wish they weren't falling asleep all the time during the day. They wish they had more friends, etc. And that then we work on those in a way by helping the young person structure their day in a mindful way, to think of their day as an empty glass that's filled up with the right amount of sleep, that is at school time, that is has homework time, has time for strenuous physical activity, which is one of those things that helps with the many issues of adolescence that Dr. McCabe brought up. They've got to get their physical yayas out, and they're sitting on their rear ends all day long. And then see what time is left, and actually create a time when they can use their media of choice, and have something after it that they like to do. So it's not about stopping something they love to do chores. It is something about helping them learn to manage their time and to structure their day.
Thank you. Dr. McCabe?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think that there's some subtle signs before it becomes really obvious. And as we mentioned in the beginning, when media use interferes with other activities, when it replaces them in terms of time, when kids lose a lot of time, and I think as a very simple intervention, helping kids more monitor how much time they're spending. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she was saying that she was spending a little bit more time now and finding herself procrastinating, and looked at her phone and saw that she had been on TikTok 8 hours yesterday. That's a sign of problematic use, right? But she had not looked. So even something as simple as monitoring the time you're spending, while we were speaking, she put a time limit on for herself and talked herself through what would happen when the time when she was alerted that the 4 hours was up, and tried to problem solve that maybe she could work her way from 8 to 4 to 2. But just that self-monitoring is a start. And then just to piggyback again on Dr. Rich, that there's things like lying to have constant access to your media. There's obviously having evidence that you're craving it, and working around making sure that you're never without your device. I think that whenever we can help kids put their phones away, especially near bedtime, we're doing them an incredible service. And the younger we can institute that, the more of a safeguard for when kids, when brain development starts to take a toll.
Thank you for your mentioning of early subtle signs. I think one of the biggest problems, at least in the pediatric and adolescent community that I work with, is that the word addiction and addict are so stigmatizing in our society, so full of blame, of weakness of character, somebody to be pitied or punished, that parents don't see those early signs. It's only when they look for all the world, like an addict, as we think of it, as an alcoholic or an opioid addict. So I think that if we can remove that word from it, parents will be able to be more sensitized to those early signs that are slipping away, from in their lives. I think it's a huge, huge important thing to hang our hats on, I guess, right? Which is, this is not an addiction. This is an attempt to soothe themselves. Why are they hurting? How are they hurting? And how can we help them?
Yeah, that's great. And just a great reminder of how important language is in terms of kind of shaping our attitudes and beliefs.
Yes.
And I want to shift a little bit to talk about what are some of the real positive out there. I know Dr. McCabe, you listed some at the beginning. Diana, can you go a little bit deeper about what are some of the great things you're seeing, and how, parents and caregivers and educators can kind of lean into those and support them?
Yeah, there are so many good things, but I'm going to say one thing just to piggyback on the previous conversation, if I may. It made me think about, I've had the privilege of working with middle school students because we teach cyber civics through our company. And one of the activities we have in 6th grade or 7th grade, I can't remember, is we have kids go on a digital vacation. It's homework. They have to try to go without screens for 24 hours. And kids complain, this is illegal. You can't make me do this. It's impossible. But every time I've done it, they come back because they have to write a little paragraph about the experience. And 9 out of 10 kids say, wow, that was awesome. I was so relaxed. I didn't feel stressed out. Let's do it again. And honestly, it kind of makes me teary, because it makes me realize this is a generation that does not know what it feels like to be disconnected. So if we can give them that little gift here and there, it's I love that you guys are talking about self-regulation. I mean, that's the key. We want kids to do this for themselves. We don't want to have to do it for them. And so the more that we can teach them and give them tools for themselves, I think is great. So sorry to segue there. Just had to add that on. But there is so much positive happening. And again, that's the privilege of working with actual kids. I think I hate the word screen time. I like to ask kids, what are you doing on your screens? And I'm always pleasantly surprised. They'll surprise me every time. And I'll give you some examples. Influencers. We know that kids are spending a ton of time on YouTube. It's the 95% of teens use YouTube. It's the most used social media network. And so parents recoil at that, thinking, oh, they're wasting their time watching all these stupid YouTube videos. Well, ask a kid what they're doing on YouTube. So they follow influencers. Now, every time I walk into a classroom in the beginning of the year, I say, hey, what influencers are you guys into this year? And I write all these names down that I've never heard of, and I go home and I Google them. And I'm like, holy cow, that's a cool person. That's so cool what they're doing. What a great role model. I'm surprised that they're pretty good. Or a kid will tell me, I spent hours watching these videos. Well, what videos did you watch? Well, one kid, for example, was watching videos on how to make a computer, and he, lo and behold, made a computer. So I think that's the key right there, is ask kids what they're doing, and hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised, as I have been. So that's personal experience. I actually have some research to share with you too. So The other thing that got a lot of headlines last year was the U.S. Surgeon's report on social media and mental health with kids. You know, that got everybody talking. But again, like, it's so important to actually read these reports to see what they say. And the Surgeon General came right out and said, you know, there's pluses and minuses with tools. And they outlined the negatives, which we all hear because they're all over in all the new books, not yours, Dr. Rich, but some other books out there. The negatives are well publicized right now. But the positives get buried, and they're buried in the research, and that's really a shame. So I'm going to read them to you tonight. A majority of adolescents report that social media helps them feel more accepted, that's 58%. Like they have people who can support them through tough times, that's 67%. Like they have a place to show their creative side, 71%. And more connected to what's going on with their friends, 80%. So we have to just, you know, go past the headlines, read the research, and understand, number one, it's not going away. Number two, a lot of kids are using it in really positive ways. Number three, let's work on that. Let's help them find the positive ways, mitigate the negative ways, and help the vulnerable kids. There are vulnerable youth out there, and generally those are the ones that unfortunately find the negative uses. So we got to find those kids and help them, put them to the other side. So we're getting there.
I should add that there are vulnerable youth that are actually helped by these communities, particularly kids who, because of their gender identity or their sexuality that they are working through actively as an adolescent, that by their race, their religion, their language, who do not feel that they have a community in their physical community, but they are able to go online and find people who look like them, sound like them, feel like them, and are validating and loving to them.
Absolutely.
So I think this is absolutely important.
And when we talk about those bans, you know, banning cell phones, I think about those kids, you know, because what we're banning is that connection that's a lifeline for so many youth that aren't getting supported at home or in their communities. So I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's very important.
Were you going to say something, Dr. McCabe?
No, that was something that I was mentioning earlier that I think is huge. I think that it's really important we hold on to both, that there's good and bad, and I think the positives are really powerful for lots of kids, including some kids with some mental health conditions. So I second everything that that's already been said.
Can you talk a little bit more about the positives for kids with mental health conditions?
Sure. Some of it is, again, seeing others who feel like they do, feeling a sense of validation, especially if they're not feeling that for any number of reasons in their day-to-day lives. I also think that they can sometimes obtain valid information about how they're feeling that's based in science and really important for them. So those are the two most important things, I think: the sense of community with others who feel similarly, and also learning about how they're feeling and why they might be feeling that way.
Right, thank you. I wanted to also underscore something Diana was saying, which I really heard from you, is that being curious, just keeping that curiosity piece, and thinking about what Morgan had raised in her opening comments, you know, saying she was fortunate enough to have a parent who was a mental health provider. And so she knew when to take breaks. And I think with that as well, you know, we as parents or caregivers or educators can also encourage kids to find and follow the people, the influencers who do make them feel better, who support their interests, who are not stressing them out. I want to highlight too, Dr. McCabe, you shared this in the chat, but you said that you invite kids to think, what are my goals with this device? And how do I feel when I'm on it or after I'm on it? And I think, again, as much as we can get them to self-regulate and build those, as Dr. Rich was saying. So I want to talk a little bit right now about some of the protective factors that we as parents, caregivers, educators can provide kids to hopefully ensure that they're not going down some of the negative paths for self-soothing. So Dr. Rich, any protective factors you can highlight, and then I'm going to come to you, Dr. McCabe.
Absolutely. I'm glad that Diana brought this up, but I talk about the 3 M's of parenting a child in the digital space. The first being model, you know, be the behavior you want to see. And, you know, it's the height of hypocrisy if you're staring at your smartphone and yelling at your kid to turn off Grand Theft Auto, right? The second one is mentor. Mentor them with these devices. Be actively involved in their lives. And I love the fact that you brought up curiosity, Diana, and echoed it again, Tali. Curiosity should be the parent as well. And so that curiosity should come in when the kid says, I want to get a smartphone, and sit down with the kid with a smartphone and be curious about what they want, what they'll do with it and stuff, rather than being judgmental or blaming or warning or shaming. To be curious about when they're playing Grand Theft Auto, sit down next to them and play the game with them. You will never have a prayer of winning, but you are coming to them as their student, in a sense, to say and saying, I love you, I respect you, I want to understand what engages you, so that when you finally figure out how to steal a car, you can turn to the child and say, so I finally figured this out. Why? Let's talk about why you might want to rehearse this over and over again. So you're not coming from a judgy place. You're coming from a curious place. You're coming from a place of, you know, authority rather than authoritarian. And the third one, and this is the one that kids and parents push back the most on, and particularly because Diana brought this up, is monitor. And parents say, I don't have the time. I can't be in, you know, her digital space all the time. But we have to recognize that these kids spend as much or more of their waking hours in digital space as they do in non-digital space. And we have to remember that parent is more importantly a verb than a noun, and we need to be there for them. So this is not about being there in their face and watching them all the time. It is about being able to, having their usernames and passwords. And the difference is not that we are watching them all the time, but because we can, the kids behave differently. And also the kids feel more free to say, oh, I went to this really weird place and it freaked me out. Let's talk about it. Rather than, oh, I've got to hide this because my parents will be mad at me. And that's why we really have to reframe our language from good and bad, right and wrong, to healthy and unhealthy, which is more dispassionate. And, you know, it will help a lot with issues like sextortion. If kids feel their parent is their ally in this space, their protector, their guide, their mentor in this space, then if they're, oh man, I'm going to get in trouble for getting that nude picture of a girl.
I'm really glad you brought up sextortion, because we work with a lot of school districts, and one of the things it was the U.S. attorney from the U.S. Department of Justice who was talking about it, was basically saying that, you know, one of the top ways to address sextortion is literally having a young person talk to an adult about what's happening. That can stop it right away. And a lot of kids are afraid to tell their parent because they're afraid they'll lose their device. And so I think that shift from the monitoring, you know, the healthy, unhealthy versus the punitive. And I'm actually going to ask you, Dr. McKay, we got a lot of questions beforehand and in the chat about what is that line between respecting, you know, a young person's autonomy and privacy and their growing, and again, wanting to kind of watch out for, you know, as Dr. Rich highlighted, the unhealthy behaviors. How should a parent kind of think about that?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And I want to piggyback on something Diana said earlier, that, you know, and also what Dr. Rich was just talking about. You know, parents have a lot on their plate, but they know their kids best. This is all going to be about communication, and some communication is better than none. So even though we may hope for some ideal back and forth with kids about, you know, their friends having certain exposures, they're wanting certain apps on their phone, they're coming across something really scary on their device. Every little bit of communication is going to help here. To the point about balancing privacy and monitoring. You know, in the APA health advisory, we recommend that certainly for kids younger than 14, we think that parents should have more monitoring. That's just based on what's typical development and kids' decision making and their self-control, and also their growing need for privacy. By the time we see kids in mid-adolescence, they deserve to have a certain amount of privacy in order to develop healthy boundaries. And they need to have a little bit of information that they keep to themselves and not share with their parents. Not all kids are alike. So for some kids, parents should be particularly concerned. And for those kids, they may be very openly monitoring kids. And I always recommend parents be honest about that. If you're looking at your child's phone and reading their texts or looking at their their online behavior, they need to know you're looking. That's teaching them to be honest. Even when you don't want to hear what they have to say, you need to be able to say to them things that they don't want to hear from you. So sometimes it's an individual thing, and sometimes it's that we think broadly about early adolescence needing a little bit more monitoring and mid and later adolescence needing a little more privacy.
And you
That's
could set that up in the mentoring process so that they totally expect it, right? That that is one of the conditions for owning this power tool.
Yeah, I appreciate the specificity. I know my former colleague, Linda Birch, who co-founded Common Sense, used to say, before kids get their first device, hey, parents and guardians, you've never had more power. So really outline all the expectations, as many as you can, even if it's as simple as, you know what, in our own home, I don't want you to ever text me when we're both in the home together. I want you to come and just talk to me or even yell for me, for example. And I do trust you, but I will be periodically checking your device. And I'm intentionally saying device because we know it's not just phones, it's iPads, all the different tablets. I will be periodically coming in and checking it. If I have cause for concern, I'm going to be checking it more often and with more frequency. I
want to hear something cool. One of the things
cool.
I very subversively ask my patients when their parents are out of the room, what could your parents do better? And almost invariably, the first thing out of their mouth is, pay more attention to me, right? That not only is it because the parents are staring at their phones, but the kids really want to hear from us. They want us to be present in their lives. They won't show it on the surface. They'll still be surly or nonverbal from time to time, but they do want us to be present in their lives. And we have to tough it out through the surliness and the nonverbalness and just stay there with them. And I think it's so important. And actually, this ties into one of my other things that we really have to think about in this heavily digital world. We have to bring back boredom. Boredom is the crucible of imagination, of curiosity, of creativity, of innovation. Not just because it puts that mental space there for it, but because that space is a little uncomfortable. So we fill it with, staring at the clouds and making shapes out of them, like ice cream castles in the air, as Joni Mitchell said. So, I think that we need to take a step back and realize that if we fill every moment with other people's ideas, we will never learn to create our own.
Absolutely. I was reading Diana, your nonverbals when Dr. Rich was talking. Did you want to add anything?
You know what? I was thinking that this kind of circled back to what we talked about at the very, very beginning. When does this start? Well, it starts really young. Like if you're curious about how the tools work and you share it with your child and they get older and, oh, let's do this together. Let's play video games together, as Dr. Rich said. And then they get older and they join Instagram and you join Instagram and you follow each other. They're like, it's not weird when you're spying on them because they're used to having you be in their digital world every step of the way, so that when they do get to, teen years and God forbid sextortion or something happens, they're used to talking to you about their digital life. So it's not weird to go to you and say, Mom, this happened, what do I do? But it's hard. That work starts young. You got to be there every step of the way. You can't just turn it on at 15 and expect them to share their digital life with you. So back to the beginning. Oh, Tally, I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. We are taking questions from the audience right now, and we've been incorporating them, but I want to throw this out to the group, one that came in. What can I do to help my child build self-esteem and positive body image that isn't reliant on social media validation? And I'm going to add to that, or isn't, negatively impacted as well by social media?
Let me jump in there. So first of all, I think that some social comparison and self-consciousness is endemic to adolescence. That's just a hallmark of adolescence. So we can't help kids be entirely comfortable in their bodies, or especially their changing bodies, or in relation to others' changing bodies. We can't help them to be entirely comfortable. But I think there's something particularly fraught in the social media space about the social comparison, because people can represent themselves in an ideal way. And some ideal standards can be promoted that are not realistic. So I think that it's communication again. It's lots and lots of conversation about kids valuing parts of themselves, and growing into how bodies are different, and looking at differences in bodies across their family and their community and their friends, and how those variations are healthy and normal. And so I come back to communication and having conversations over and over that extend and go in interesting, important ways, and also help kids value other parts of themselves above and beyond just their physical body.
I would also add to that. I said earlier, physical activity was important to get their energy, to get the yayas out. It's also important to help them learn the capabilities of their body, the strength of their body. So it's not about being an object for other people so much as it's, what can I do? Some kids are great runners. Other kids are great swimmers. Some kids are soccer players. But to let them explore the possibilities, I think we have been overprotective of our children, that we don't want them to get hurt. Let them climb trees, let them, play soccer or a sport that seems a little scary. And let them celebrate their bodies for what their bodies can do. The second thing, and this goes back to the digital literacy thing, is for them to understand, one, that what they see online may or may not be real, that it is just way too easy with beauty filters, with all kinds of photoshopping in various ways to create an unreal ideal out there. And unfortunately, what we have fallen into, and teenagers are particularly susceptible to this, is using social media the same way the corporations do to market ourselves to each other, to show my dad's new sports car, or the great vacation I went on, or my hot new boyfriend. So then people come to social media seeking connection, seeking to feel at one with other people. And it seems like everyone else is better looking, richer, happier, and more fulfilled than they are. And it becomes a competition. Now, I genuinely believe that if we can help young people in particular, but all of us, to use social media authentically, where we talk about the things we really care about, including the things that we feel uncomfortable with, or we feel are our limitations, things that scare us, then we will build a truer social media, and we will build truer relationships with each other. And this is one of the ways in which those marginalized kids find community online, is they tell each other they're left out, they're scared, they're bullied, whatever. And they are authentic with each other. And my fond hope, as they often say, is that sometime in the future, there will be a kid in Ukraine and a kid in Russia, for example, that are on social media with each other and are authentically connected. And their leaders will say, take up arms against them. And they'll say, forget you. I don't know you. I know that kid you're telling me is my enemy. And I think that if we can use social media effectively, it can be an instrument of peace.
I just wanted to jump on the digital literacy thing because I think that right there is the key. You know, we have a whole section in our curriculum, visual literacy, and we cover media stereotypes, media representation and stereotypes. And I tell you, like, those lessons are so powerful. The kids, they go so deep with the kids because then they get to really discover how things are manipulated online, that how many kids use Facetune, how they're all feeling inferior to the images they see, and they talk about it, you know, and it's just to bring that to the forefront and have kids have a discussion about that and understand how it works. You know, it's just, it solves that problem, honestly, for most kids. They just need to digest it and talk about it and figure it out. So, and you know, that's literacy. Visual literacy is today's literacy. Kids, you know, visual images are how they learn about their world. So we have to teach kids how to have that skill.
So a follow-up question there, as we're talking about the media literacy piece, absolutely. And I think the ability to build authentic relationships, I'm imagining that there is, it's also about knowing your kid and the developmental piece, because I can also imagine a kid struggling and very heartfelt, reaching out and sharing those struggles and just coming back with a lot of hate speech. So I think part of the media literacy piece there is also who you share that with, what kind of communities as well. And I wanted to ask all of you to kind of talk a little bit. I know both Dr. McCabe and Dr. Rich talked about this feeling of discomfort. Can you talk a little bit more about how we can help our kids understand kind of the being uncomfortable or the power of discomfort versus being unsafe?
Go for it.
I don't know what you mean by that question.
Yeah,
Honestly. I'm confused by that.
I
question.
don't either.
Yeah, very fair. I think it sounds like we're all promoting the idea that it's normal and healthy to feel uncomfortable sometimes, right? And wanting to differentiate that between potentially having an interaction where it's actually unsafe, where I could be physically harmed, for example. But it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And I don't want to just, you know, turn to my device every time I feel uncomfortable or I have a yucky.
Okay. I see what you mean. I think you're also relating it to Dr. Rich's point about boredom. Yeah, I can't tell you. Somebody yesterday also just mentioned to me a young woman, actually in her 30s, that grew up, you know, in her teen years was the introduction of things like Facebook and Instagram, and that she still finds herself gravitating to them when she needs to tune out and needs to take a break and kind of wants to have what she calls sort of some numbing. I think that's part of what Diana was talking about as social emotional skills. It's a foundational understanding about knowing that when you, so first of all, identifying what you're feeling, and then identifying a whole range of tools to address when you're feeling bored, preoccupied, and you're not quite sure what's on your mind, but you don't feel kind of quite right. Or you had an interaction and instead of what lots of kids fall into, unfortunately, which is ruminating about it, maybe finding somebody to talk to about it and process it. Actually, one of the things I would mention, because it has such a great growing research base, is that writing about how you feel can sometimes help you understand it better and move through it. So I think it's really social emotional learning, going back to Diana's point, and understanding that there's a range of discomfort, and sometimes it crosses a line and you need to alert somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's kind of a skill you hope kids would learn before they go on digital media, you know, that maybe you could instill those things by doing the social emotional things. It made me think we just we just made some lessons for 4th and 5th grades. And one of them is like, what am I feeling? And when you're uncomfortable, how do you deal with that feeling? And it's a 3-step thing. Like, first of all, stop, take a deep breath. Second, identify your feeling. And once you identify your feeling, that will teach you where you need to go for help. So just like, that's such a simple little lesson. And I think for kids to know that in the offline world first, hopefully they'll recall that when something uncomfortable happens in the real, the online world where the stakes are a lot higher. But again, we got it. I saw someone ask, like, what's the right age to give a kid a phone? And I think the right age is after you lay the groundwork. You have to teach them so many skills first, so that when they do get a phone and something, uncomfortable, unsafe happens, they have those skills in place to know how to deal with that event.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Dr. McCabe said about how important writing is. A generation ago, virtually every preteen and teen girl had a diary, right? And she would write in that diary, lock it up in her bedside stand. And that was one of the ways that she was able to process it. Unfortunately, now the diary is Snapchat or Insta or or any one of these. And so instead of having it locked up in their bedside stand, they're posting it on a billboard. And there's a whole different dynamic there, which is it makes them vulnerable. So they change what they write and what they're able to write. They can be teased or bullied as a result of it. So I think these are really, really important things to think through what the implications of these various ways of coping are. The other thing is that one of the ways in which teenagers in particular feel uncomfortable is everybody sees that zit in the middle of my forehead, or, I'm getting fat, or any of those things. And to help them take a moment and say, so did you notice a zit on any of your friends' faces today? No, not really. Did you notice how heavy they were? Not really. So what makes you think that they're paying attention to your zit and your love handles? So, I mean, I think that it's really important to let them get out of themselves a little bit and realize that everybody else is struggling in various ways. They're making their way in the world in various ways, and they're not paying attention to them as much as they think.
Great point. And if you do have a kid who is highly critical and does notice that about everyone else as well, any advice there?
Oh, that's a tough one. We're now into the Mean Girls and the Burn book, my friend, right? Because usually those things are as exaggerated as the ones who are self-conscious are exaggerating their own flaws. And I think that is that is really a bullying situation more than anything else, at least in its social dynamic. I think that one of the things that when I find out one of my patients, for example, is in that situation, I seek to find what has hurt them. I seek to find the things that are causing them to be so critical of others, because it is usually a reflection of something they're struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah. So that symptom again, and how you can kind of uplift all the positive areas.
Right.
Before we kind of close, we have one more question that came in, and would, sending this to the group. How can I encourage my kid to be more present and off their devices during activities? So again, we're trying to do something away from the device, but they keep going back to it.
Modeling. What we talked.
Yeah, modeling, and I think it's really helpful for families. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a family media plan. To have a family plan around which activities are device free. In other words, the more it can be a ritual, the more it can be kind of like a shared understanding that incorporates modeling, but also incorporates some family rule that, of course, parents get to decide. But kids can buy into, and the younger the better. Then it's not a matter of then punishing them by taking the device away during an activity. One of the things that is really usually not helpful is suddenly coming up with a new rule. that seems unfair. But if something's both, a tradition or agreed upon in advance or laid out in advance, we're going to change the way we operate. Starting next month or next week, we're never going to have phones when we're eating, or we're never going to have phones when we're watching a movie together, or we're never going to have devices when X, Y, Z, right? I think that's a fantastic approach.
I might offer as a resource on the CyberWise website, we have a tech agreement, and it's actually a 4-page like talking points with your child. And we always encourage parents to have one with every child at every age and stage, because kids need boundaries. They just do, especially, the little young preteen kids. And when you have something in black and white that you've negotiated ahead of time, it helps them start creating their own boundaries when they have the device, and you can trust them, but revisit the agreement to see if everything's in place, maybe revise it as they get older. But I think having that in place for kids is really helpful. It's on the CyberWise site under our learning hubs, and a free download for anyone who can use that.
That's
Thank-
especially useful if you are changing a pattern, that has been established in another way. A lot of it can be started off just like, you don't get on a bike unless you have a helmet. You don't get in the car. I don't start the car until your seatbelt is fastened. So those sort of things. But when you're shifting gears, I think it's really important to have something in writing and to post it on the fridge. So you don't end up in an argument every time you said this, I said that, right? To have it available to everyone so that it's not debatable because it's all in plain sight.
And one last thing to add is we had a panel with teens a few years ago, and one of the young men shared that he was struggling with, video games all the time, and his parents were really trying to get him off of it. And he said, all of a sudden we had all these family activities, like dinner together as a family, or we had like tag football, like things where he literally couldn't be on his device. And it was gradual. It didn't feel manipulative. He was, a little bit reticent, but he talked about that. So I just feel like some of those places where you can insert those activities that everyone is going to enjoy as well, and that necessitate no phone use, can also be helpful.
That's
So
absolutely essential. So it's not a negative. It's not cutting off something. It's starting something new.
Yeah.
right. Oh, and I was thinking about that too, with that curiosity in terms of what are you doing on your phone? If a lot of the activities are socializing with friends, whether it's video games or social media, which makes sense, are there opportunities to have those in-person connections too? Because still, from my experience talking to teens, they'd still always rather be in person. A lot of times they're using these other, features because they can't be together in person all the time and have that kind of freedom.
Guess we got to bring back the mall.
That's right. That's right. That's right, the mall. So I guess we're coming towards the end, and I just wanted to invite each of you to share some closing thoughts, and I would say 45 seconds or less to leave with the group. So I'm going to go across what I see in my screen. So Diana, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, I would just say, don't be anxious, be curious. And I think ask your kids what they're doing online. They might surprise you. They might be doing things that are kind of interesting and awesome. So give them the benefit of the doubt. And kids are really smart. And I think that we need to remember that and really encourage schools to teach digital literacy in the classroom and let kids learn all of these things on their own, so they can discover how to self-regulate, because that's going to be really important. And they can decide what their time is worth. Is it worth giving it to these apps that sort of manipulate them? Let them make those decisions. But again, they're not going to have that knowledge unless we carve out a little bit of time in school to do that, and to remind our schools that digital literacy really is today's literacy.
Thank you. Dr. McCabe?
I would say, especially for parents, not to let perfect be the enemy of the good. To start a conversation about digital media and digital literacy, and keep it going for years. Check in periodically. Have you seen anything recently that's been hard? Have you seen anything interesting, to Diana's point? How are you feeling about it? Do you feel like you're doing it too much, too little? Is there any other way I can help? And have that conversation happen over the course of years.
Thank you. And Dr. Rich?
I'd say remember the 5 M's, the 3 that you do with your kids: model, mentor, monitor, and the 2 benefits you get from that, which is mastery and making memories. And instead of seeking killer apps, we should be developing our killer bees. And those bees are: be mindful in the way we use our screens, and be balanced between our screen and non-screen time. And the way to do that is not with screen time limits, but with minimal non-screen time. Just like the challenge of, turning it off for 24 hours. And the most important killer bee is be present for our children. Wow, I made balloons happen.
Love the balloons. I want to thank each of you so much for sharing. And I want to thank everyone who joined tonight for the thoughtful questions as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer now.
I'm so overwhelmed. This was so fantastic. The content, the information, I was taking notes the whole time. I really thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Tali, for moderating this. I'm really honored to have had you all here to have shared this information. As while I work at Every Mind, I'm also the mother of a middle schooler. And so I really appreciate all of the content. And so, one of our main mission at Every Mind is looking at like reducing the stigma. And our mission is Every Mind strengthens communities and empowers individuals to reach optimal mental wellness. And what we have found, and the reason we wanted to bring this content, is that this is now part of our mental wellness and bringing content like this to the community. So thank you so much. And I want to let all of the participants know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, if it hasn't come across your space at all. And we have services across the lifespan in terms of providing services, events like this for community education. If you are so inclined, feel free to click on the QR code and donate anything that might be meaningful to you. We will be sending out this recording as well, so that more people can continue to really listen to this. And I'd also like to, I think if we have our next slide, I think maybe this code might be blocked potentially. So we'll move on to our next slide. I wanted to make sure, again, during Mental Health Awareness Month, is it working now? Oh, there we go. It's in the chat. Thank you so much. And in our next slide, also, because it's Mental Health Awareness Month, I just want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors for this month, and really appreciate their support for the work that we're doing as well. And I have one more slide, I think, at the very end, which is we have another in this series that'll be happening. So please keep a lookout. It'll be coming in fall of 2024. And we'll be talking about demystifying youth mental health data and what that means for all of you. We would love it if you could complete the event survey. It's so helpful to us to help guide us in providing content that's relevant to you all in the community that we can do all this for. The other thing that will be in the follow-up email are all of the resources. While we posted them in chat, I know for me, sometimes I'm listening and I'm not always looking at the chat. We will have all of the resources from all of our panelists, as well as additional resources that you might find useful for you in this space. So thank you again, really from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate all the participation, and thank you again to all of our panelists. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.